Hi there, this is an overview and a quick start guide for Volumator. Perhaps you just installed it or want to evaluate it to see if it's a good fit for you. So at a high level, we have 5 main panels here: Build, Barrier, Test, Edit, and Automate. So we'll start out with the Build panel and we'll build a simple volume. We have 3 ways to build a volume depending on your use case. Let's start with piloting mode. So we click the Start button, we fly around, detect points focusing on the perimeter, and when we get back to around our start point, press the Stop button, and there's our volume. And it's as high as the highest point that was detected, and obviously the extents reach out as far as the detected geometry too. Now alternatively, if we don't want to fly around ourselves, we can just start a build drone, and that will do the flying for us. And the last mode is more manual, so we're going to start building vertices only, and we're literally going to place each volume point. So we'll add a second one here, and then a final one which will complete the loop back to the start point. And there's our volume. And the height again is as high as it was detected. That first example was obviously a contained room, and not all spaces are like that. And so if you have open areas like this that you need to cordon off, this is where our barriers come in. So we open the barrier panel, we come to our open space here, click barrier volume or barrier plane, and then it will fill the space with a barrier which will block detection and drones. And then we'll do this one here too. And so now our drones and detection rays will not fly through the barriers. And that will allow us to constrain Volumator's tools to the area that you specify, blocking off open areas so that we don't bleed into other spaces. Depending on your content, you may not be getting expected results. So let's have a look at some settings to see what we can do here. So in this example here, the content in this level doesn't have watertight simple collision. And that's what by default it uses. As you can see, the volume is extending into the other areas. And that's because if we switch over to player collision, we can see that there's holes or gaps in the simple collision. And the detection rays and even the drone itself can get through these areas. The drone has a size to it, but you can see here that the detection rays are going to go straight through this. And so that's why the volume ended up going into the next area. So instead, we will open detection settings and enable detect complex. And that will instead switch from simple to complex detection, and it may fix this problem. So now this is much better, but it's still doing it. And the reason for that will be, we can see that there's actually a gap in the art. If I switch it to unlit mode, you can physically see through the wall here. So it's obviously not well aligned. And we can also account for that as well. So instead of just having complex, we can also increase the detection width. And that will make detection fire a bar rather than a ray. And so the bar won't be able to fit through that little gap there. And this is in Unreal units. Let's try this again. And now we can see that the volume doesn't overlap into the other area. So now we're getting good detection results from this geometry, but we can also use this detection type setting here if we want, and that will filter out the data in different ways. Let's have a little look at regenerating and editing existing volumes. Let me just quickly build a volume here. And if we press Show Selected, we can hide everything except the volume. And here we can see the volume quite clearly, with a couple of little warnings here on geometry that were detected but aren't actually covered by the volume currently. So if we want to update this volume, maybe we find it too detailed and we want to lower the complexity, we can regenerate it with tweaked settings. So let's open up the generation settings. And it was currently built with a resolution of 200, as you can see here. But let's try increasing this to 300 and press the regenerate button, and that will regenerate the currently selected volume. And you can see it instantly made it simpler and cleaner. And if we want to, we can nudge the resolution up and down in the edit panel by pressing these buttons here, which will add or subtract to the current resolution amount on the volume. Let's reset it, and this will set it back to what it was when we originally created it. Now, what we have on the volume is out of sync with what's on the widget, so we can recall the settings, and that will push the settings from the volume to Volumator itself. And you can now see that the resolution is back to 200 again. Now, if we want to, we can directly move the vertices on the volume. If we click this button here, we can see a spline that makes up the position. So we can physically move these and commit. And you can now see that the volume takes that shape. Or we can even just delete them straight up like this. And it's a really fast way to manipulate volumes. In this example, we've just built a volume for this apartment here. And you can see when we build volume that we get warnings here that tell us where detected areas are not in the created volume. So there's some here and some here. So what we can do is we can expand the volume, which will sort of inflate it and push all of the walls outwards. So by increasing the expand amount, and again, this is in Unreal units, it will push the walls out in the direction of the normal of the object that they hit. So if we press regenerate again, you can see that the volume is pushing out bit by bit. And again, we have nudge buttons in the edit panel. And now the volume has no issues and all the detected points are inside the volume. As you saw in the last example, we get immediate feedback on any detected points that aren't in the created volume. The validation system uses that data to iteratively improve the volume until all of the points are inside the volume. So let's do a quick example here. Just going to fire a drone out to cover this fairly rectangular space. So we have a volume here that has a few warnings on it. And by enabling the validation system, when we regenerate, the volume will be iteratively rebuilt with different settings to get the perfect shape for the volume. Now, if we want to get rid of all warnings, we can open up the validation settings, lower the threshold down to 0, and this will create a perfect volume. And so now the volume will absolutely cover the space with no exceptions. An important setting for building volumes is the generation mode, and that determines the algorithm that's used to build the volume. So far we've been looking at perimeter mode, and that works in a lot of cases, but the voxel mode here works great for these very angular shapes, things like corridors, lots of concave sections here. And here we kind of really just want a blocky outline, and so the voxel mode is perfect for this. Let's take a look at it in action. So the positive for this mode is you'll never get any warnings or errors. It's always fully covered, but you have to do a really thorough search. As it's voxels, it doesn't handle curves very well, but it does a really good job in situations like this. You can also switch between the modes after the fact, just like any other generation setting. So here's a nice perimeter mode volume, and we can switch it to voxel mode, and you can see the outline of the voxels really clearly here. So far, we've been looking at enclosed indoor spaces, but let's look at a difficult outside space. So here we have a whole village that we want to cover over with a volume. And we have some starts and endpoints that we need to cover. So we're going to use a barrier fence. And this is similar to the volumes and planes, but you add individual points to it. So we're going to start building the barrier fence here, and we'll have it end just about here. And we want to increase the scale. So we're going to select the fence piece, scale it up massively, make sure it's nice and big. So that's the entrance to the village, and the exit, another fence here, and we'll end it here. Again, we're going to scale it up. Now, I could do this with a drone, but in this case, let's try piloting. Can be a bit more specific about the perimeter that way. So we just fly around the perimeter. I'll just speed up this part of the video so you don't have to watch me doing it. And when we're ready, we press the stop building. And there's our volume. We're able to do this in under a minute, but if I'd used a drone, it probably would have done it in about 10 or 20 seconds. Looks good. Let's scale it up a little bit. And if we want to, we can increase the resolution to make it coarser. Because it was such a large area, the system auto-detected that, and it changed the resolution from our current setting to a larger one. So the actual resolution is 1100. And if you're ever curious, you can click the report and get good information here. But let's try increasing it to 3000 and regenerate. And you can see the volume is considerably more simple, but still covers the space. Okay, let's just regenerate it again with more detail. And this time we're going to try removing concavities using the simplify concavities control. And that'll simplify the volume by removing any small indents like this. So let's increase this to the max and then regenerate. And this will remove any small concave sections. And it's really safe to use because it won't make the volume smaller. It just removes concave sections. So there are a bunch of options in here allowing you to tailor the volume to get the perfect complexity and shape. So you can run a quick test on any volume and it'll instantly tell you whether or not the detected points are inside the volume. We can see that this volume here, if I go to show selected, I've got a few points here, a few here and here. And this is really helpful when editing volumes to focus your efforts on those areas. But let's say we haven't opened the level in a while, and maybe the geometry has changed, and we want to check to see if the volume is still enclosing the space. So for that, we can go over to the test panel, and we can again use piloting in drones to check to see if the volume is inside the space. So let's try piloting, and we'll see if we can find that spot over there. And as we fly around, we're detecting to see if there's any spaces that aren't enclosed by the volume. And we can see how many warnings and errors we've got here. And these are the points that I was able to detect that aren't inside the volume. Now, these may not have been valid. It really depends on the situation. Again, if we go to show selected, we can see the extent of the problem here. Let's come to the top-down view, and we can assess whether or not it's a problem. And this ties in really nicely with the edit modes. So we can simply edit vertices, move this vertex here, and then we fix the problem. We have a bunch of other great testing features here too, though. Let's say somebody's moved this wall here, and we want to check to see if this volume is still encompassing the space. We can test for geometry changes, and it will instantly tell us that the detected points on this volume are no longer colliding with something. So previously, when we detected the space, this was detecting something, and now it's not. And so it's obvious that something's changed here. We may need to redetect the volume. We can also teleport between the different issues. So for example, we can directly jump to this warning here that was on the geometry, or we can jump to the geometry changes that were detected here and scroll through them all to assess them. So in a really complicated map, it's really helpful. We can also test for volume overlaps as well. So I've just scaled up this volume next door slightly so it bleeds into the space over this volume here. And this time I'm going to use a drone, and we'll fly the drone around in this area, and we will have multi-volume test enabled, and it will check for overlaps. And you can see it's showing us all the areas where two volumes are overlapping. So this is really helpful in cases where you need to ensure volumes are exclusive to areas. So in addition to having this handy log info here, we can also run a full report. And this tells us lots of really helpful information about the volume, gives us a really good overview on what's going on in the level. So far, everything we've built has been done manually, but wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to do it ourselves? And that's where the automate panel comes in, and it's handled using depot actors. So let's come down to this section here. We're going to add a depot actor, and then when we start the depot, it builds the volume for us. And then if we run the depot again, it will test it. Now, there was no errors or warnings in that case, but if there is any, then it will rebuild the volume. Now, it's important to note, though, that the volume itself stays the same. So it's only the shape of the mesh that changes. So let's just change this property on the volume here. So you'll see that this remains even after the volume is built. And we're going to pull this piece of geometry out. And now when we run the depot again, it will detect that this has changed, that the volume needs to get rebuilt, and it will redetect the area and update the shape of the volume. So it almost immediately failed tests, and now it's redetecting the area. And there's our fixed volume with the property intact. And so what that means is we can populate our rooms with the depot actors and then run them all at once, and the entire level can be built, tested, and rebuilt if there are changes. So I just started all the depots in the level, and they'll run one by one. If a depot has no volume on it, it will build one, and if it does have a volume on it, it will be tested for changes, and if it needs rebuilding, it will do it automatically. And the entire map now has all its volumes covered. At any moment, we can run a report on all the depots and see exactly what's happened and the status of all of them. So this was only a quick overview giving you a small insight into what's possible with Volumator. There's so many features I haven't covered, but you should get a sense of how Volumator can help make your development life easier and more productive. Feel free to check out the in-depth tutorials, go check out the documentation, or reach out to me over email. Thanks very much.